Luigi's Mansion 3 is the first home console sequel to the original Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube. Now, before I get into reviewing Luigi's Mansion 3, I just want to quickly go over the previous two titles so you kind of know where I stand on those before getting into it. So, I love Luigi's Mansion 1. That was like one of my favorite games on the GameCube. I used to play it all the time as a kid. I'm very nostalgic for it. I even started speedrunning it later in high school, and I greatly anticipated the second game on the 3DS. However, once it released, I got it, and I ended up playing it on my sister's 3DS, and I found it really frustrating and more annoying than enjoyable. I still enjoyed the game overall, but I never went through and replayed it or did everything in the game. And I think a lot of it had to do with how annoying EGAD was. He was always calling you constantly in your face about everything. And I also just really hated the mission-like structure. The mission-based structure made the whole game more linear, and it also made you have to repeat content a bunch of times, as you would clear a room and it wouldn't actually be cleared, it would just be cleared for that mission until you had to go back through a minute later to do all the same things again, except go one room farther, which I just found really annoying. So, without further ado, now that those opinions are out of the way, let's get into the Luigi's Mansion review. Upon first glance, this game looks absolutely astonishing. These models are beautiful, the lighting is masterfully done, and the animations are some of the best quality and quantity I've seen in a game in a long time, or maybe ever. Luigi just has so many different facial animations. Every single nook and cranny of this game is just dripping with detail and character and charm. And you can really feel that the team working on this game was super passionate about this project. So to start out this game, Luigi, a couple Toads, Mario and Peach are all on their way to a brand new hotel. And upon arrival, everything seems to be smooth sailing to our characters, and they go to bed without a worry in the world. But then, in the middle of the night, you awake to Princess Peach screaming. And after going and doing some investigation, you not only find that your friends have been captured, but that King Boo is back and ready to take revenge on Luigi and his friends. At this point in the game, you're introduced to the newest poltergeist in the series, Poltergeist G00, or the Poltergeist Goo. The capabilities of this machine have been improved immensely since previous titles, and they overall just juiced all of Luigi's moves. You can feel every single object get sucked up into your vacuum, and it feels glorious. Throughout the game, you're going to unlock new moves for the Poltergeist, allowing you to eventually be able to shoot and pull plungers, use a Dark Light, the Strobel Burst, Poltergeist Burst, and of course gives you control over Luigi. These developments to Luigi's moveset fit perfectly in this world, and each and every one of these new moves gets utilized throughout the entire experience multiple times. They have multiple implications, and not only do they have environmental applications, but also combat, or dare I say, like platforming type implications that are really cool and make this entire world just feel more tangible. Gameplay in Luigi's Mansion 3 will consist of sucking up ghosts, solving environmental puzzles, whether these are mandatory or optional, and fighting boss ghosts. Easily the most polished and interesting sections of this game revolve around these 17 boss ghosts. Now, each boss is uniquely designed, and no two are defeated the same way, requiring you to figure out how to defeat them before executing the proper moves. These bosses are all fully formed, well-developed ideas that are pretty challenging and fun to face off against. And for the most part, each consecutive boss gets more and more challenging, although there are a couple noticeable difficulty spikes in these encounters, and also a couple easier ones. When you're not fighting boss ghosts, and they're just normal ghosts, there isn't really a ton of variety in the ghosts that you run into. There are basically 5 types, if you count the 2 small ones together. There's these goober ones that are pretty normal, big red guys, and then there's these guys that throw things at you. And you would think that that would get stale really quickly, but because of the level of diversity in the props that they can utilize, it feels as though there's a lot more. You'll be constantly required to learn how to fight the same enemies, but in new situations. And because of this, even with this small number of ghosts, it doesn't really feel that it gets stale. I would say overall, the basic ghost encounters aren't incredibly fun, but they can offer some interesting gameplay and are fun for a while, especially with the new, I would call it like this whip attack, where you throw a ghost back and forth and you can knock it into other enemies, stun them, and suck them up, and able to chain ghosts, which just allows for more fluid, quick, easy fun of just clearing out rooms of ghosts. The last primary aspect of this game is exploring and going through these environmental puzzles. Basically, I found that most of these puzzles were pretty good, and they actually required some thinking, and you felt good about solving them. You actually had like this sense of achievement for a lot of these. And these were especially good with the puzzles that involved both Luigi and Luigi. At the beginning of the game, I was pretty worried that Luigi was going to be kind of a feature that was tacked on to, just list that they had Luigi as a feature, but I was really wrong about this, and Luigi was actually used in a lot of really interesting ways. He was actually kind of hard to get used to at first, and I found myself often getting tripped up by simple puzzles because I wasn't thinking to just switch to Luigi and utilize his moveset. And it's astounding that you can have all these different varieties of puzzles that are added simply by putting Luigi, who has the same exact moves as Luigi. He just can't touch water, and he can go through vents. That's it. But it adds a complete other dimension to this game, and a lot of complexity to a lot of puzzles, especially in the latter portions of the game. And it makes it really interesting and fun and different from previous titles. Now, even with all this good being said, not all is incredible about these puzzles. I found on numerous occasions that there were puzzles where you were given almost no direction as to how to solve them, which renders you just confused and aggravated. I frequently was getting frustrated with different sections of this game, and I don't think many of these puzzles the team intended to be challenging. I think that they simply didn't communicate well enough what you had at your disposal as the player. I will say that a large number of these issues did come up when I had EGAD's automatic hints turned off, and once I turned these on, I did see that a bunch of these were fixed, but I personally don't really like being given hints without my consent, or even answers without my consent, because the fun of a puzzle is actually solving it and doing it on your own, and I like that, so I turned those off. But I think that the development team was relying on the usage of them too much and wasn't really considering the players that would have it turned off. And so they didn't really present all the information that you need to solve all the puzzles. I'll say as well, just to clarify, that these situations only happened to me where I got really frustrated about 3 times throughout the entire game, so it's not really a big deal. I did think that most of these puzzles were well presented and something that I could tackle, but I did have a couple of those situations where I did really struggle. One example was like, I did struggle to get into a shop and kill a normal enemy type that they were introducing, and it took me about an hour or more. It took me like over an hour, just because I wasn't given enough direction to figure out everything that I needed to do these tasks. And I was also given extra information that was actually kind of misleading and made me think that one thing was a solution while it really had nothing to do with anything. Aside from these moments, the game was really enjoyable. The floors were all really different and felt really individual, and I found most of them pretty interesting, although a couple were, they were okay. And I felt like there was a good variety in length, which kept things better paced for me personally, instead of just having all long floors or all short floors. But one thing that did kill the pacing for me was this frickin' cat. This cat was god-awful. Basically, you would just complete a floor as you normally would, but then at the end, when you think you're done, and you get to progress into the next part of the game, this cat just jumps out of nowhere and just steals all your progress, basically, making you go back a couple floors and tread through all these old floors you've already cleared. They add no new content to them. And it's solely just so that you can go back and get your elevator button so that you can progress through the game that they just stole from you. And the backtracking was boring. The fights with this cat were just monotonous. It wasn't interesting, pretty simple. And it really only seemed like it was there to pad time. The game would have been much better without these two sections. Yeah, they were pretty awful, but otherwise the pacing was good. And aside from this, I only have two more complaints really, one being similar to the last, being that EGAD doesn't really give you all the information and tools that you need right off the bat. You are called for him basically once a floor for the most part. Obviously there's some times where you get no calls, and there's a lot of floors, especially in the earlier ones, that you're called much more frequently. He makes you basically trek all the way back to the lab multiple times before giving you this device that lets you fast travel there. He holds out on tools that are required to get some of the optional gems on floors that you've already cleared. So that means like if you want all the gems, or to fully explore all of the levels, you are going to be required to replay some of those floors because you just don't have the tools at your disposal when you're playing through it the first time. And going back and forth from this lab so frequently, especially in the beginning portions, it kept taking me out of the experience of just exploring this mansion and, doing the part that I found really fun. I just felt like I was being blocked from progressing on multiple occasions because of this. My next gripe with this game has to do with the floors being too varied and too linear. So, first of all, it sounds like being varied would probably be a good thing. And while it is interesting to go from a hotel floor that is pretty normal to something like a medieval castle, it just doesn't seem like a medieval castle should fit in a hotel. It feels like it's only there because it's interesting visually and the developers thought it would be a cool area for Luigi to explore, but there's no reason for this medieval castle to be in a hotel. There was at least stuff like a garden level that had hotel rooms and floors that were just overgrown, but a lot of these floors have nothing resembling anything to do with a hotel at all, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it does kind of take me out of the experience and sort of make the hotel feel like a less tangible place. It's hard for me to conceptualize what I should think about this hotel when looking back on it. When I think back to Luigi's Mansion 1, I know exactly what that hotel looks like. I can picture it. It has like a style to it. This seems very, haphazard and varied, which is a double-edged sword, as it gives some of that interesting areas that are really unique, different, have their own feel, that are custom to like the bosses in that area, but then it also just takes away from the feeling of a cohesive hotel. So along with the variation, one of the major problems is that all of the floors have a different floor plan. And so none of the separate areas can connect with one another via stairways or anything like that, making the elevator the only means of transportation between floors. And this makes all the floors feel like linear sequences as opposed to open floors, like the original. And I think that this linear versus open design seem to conflict quite often, as many floors I would be exploring an area only to be berated by EGAD, telling me to go to the end of the level right away and skip all the exploration. Or I'd be exploring a room, and then I'd kind of go and do the main content that I was supposed to, and the main content would lead me back to that room that I had already explored, and just kind of make me re-explore it again, even though I'd already gone through all of it. It felt like they were trying to stick to the mission-based approach of the second game, but tried to disguise it in the floor layout. Alright, so now that I've talked about the good and the bad, I'd like to say that overall I liked most of the floors and most of the bosses of the game. I felt like the game was really polished, it played really well, it was interesting, fun. The diversity of the levels helped keep my interest throughout the experience. And I was constantly seeing new areas. The Boscos were some of the most interesting encounters I've had in a long while. But it did have those frustrating moments that I'd mentioned, in which I don't think they did enough level design to properly show the player what was available to them. And I didn't particularly like how linear a lot of the floor plans seemed, and I didn't like how disconnected they were, as you couldn't really go between them other than the elevator. So that was a little bit disappointing compared to the original. And I also felt like I was forced to backtrack way too much, whether it was through the cat or through EGAD. I would definitely say this game's worth playing, especially if you're a fan of Luigi's Mansion. And I think overall it's a really great experience and I enjoyed myself. So, as a final verdict, I give this Luigi's Mansion 3 a 4 on 5 penguins. Alright, well, that was my review of Luigi's Mansion 3, 4 out of 5, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and please share your thoughts about Luigi's Mansion 3 in the comments below. Let me know what you think and what you thought about it compared to the previous ones. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great one.